Pakistan is a vulnerable country, and also wherever we see our government speaking at international forums, the demand of climate finance is obviously there.
I went to COP28, which was in Dubai, and I was one of the negotiators on the climate mitigation stream. And what I felt was something I can only express disappointment of that whole experience in general for me as a non-government person going into that to help the government. We do not have async content, we do not have policy drive, and then also we keep changing faces so often that every time a new person comes in, they have this bright idea that they're going to revolutionize how Pakistan thinks about climate, and it doesn't really get anywhere. So I felt a lot of global isolation, and I think Pakistan really needs to work on this from a foreign office perspective and a climate change perspective both. I think Pakistan is not in the best space, and I think we're slightly behind our regional partners because globally climate finance has become a hot topic where the private sector is really pouncing on it. And I think as institutions within the private sector as well, our banks, I feel that some of them are dinosaurs because they've become so used to lending to the government that they feel no need to innovate. We've made this tool called CarbonTrack. It's fully AI enabled, and what we're doing is with the global standards, we've come out with emission factors which are also globally acclaimed, and we're going to help organizations, private and public, churn their data, tell them how to improve their data, and give them a way forward for the next 5 to 10, 15 years, and also help them report so they can actually deliver those results to their clients.
Hello and welcome to another installment of Front Seat to Climate Change. We have with us today Mekaeel Malik, who is the founder of CarbonTrack and has a lot of experience working on issues of climate finance and also working with the private sector in this realm. And as a country, Pakistan's need for climate finance keeps on getting highlighted. So I think let's just get into it. Pakistan is a vulnerable country, and also wherever we see our government speaking at international forums, the demand of climate finance is obviously there. But do we have any numbers on the amount of money that has come into Pakistan, and also what is the actual requirement, and how much of that you see is the government able to manage to get, or maybe might it be able to get in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Davar, firstly for having me. It's an honor to be here. I think in terms of the numbers, I won't really dive too deeply into them because they're varying, and I have my doubts in terms of how quantifiable that data actually is. But in terms of the requirement, I think as a baseline, the World Bank report states we need over $300 billion in the next decade, which is, to my mind, just the baseline of what we need as a country at this point in time. In terms of generally how we can get there and what we need to do, I think there's a cross-sector government private sector approach that we kind of need to take forward, and I think that there's a lot to be done to kind of get there for now.
And you were, I think, I remember that you were also at COP28, and you have experiences working in this sort of like negotiating setting as well. What has been the narrative that Pakistan takes forward, and do you think that narrative so far has been successful enough in generating enough advocacy around Pakistan's needs?
Okay, so this experience is really something I'm passionate about. So I went to COP28, which was in Dubai, and I was one of the negotiators on the climate mitigation stream. And what I felt was something I can only express disappointment of that whole experience in general for me as a non-government person going into that to help the government. Because we changed so many governments, there actually no cohesion in terms of what we said at COP28, what we said at COP29 a few months ago, and then what we want to say at COP30, because we actually don't know who's going to go to COP30, right? The ministers changed, the secretaries changed. So just as an example, of the top 10 most senior bureaucrats at COP28, only one survived COP29. So you're actually never going to get async material. Whilst when you look at countries like India, they had the same team for over a decade, right? And they weren't just bureaucrats, they were technocrats. They were PhDs, doctorates in their subject matters. You see Saudi Arabia, very young delegation, close to 30, mid-30s, but had been focusing on the same subject matter from undergrad there on in, right? Even Bangladesh for that matter, I'm talking about regional partners. So I think the first problem is we do not have async content, we do not have policy drive, and then also we keep changing faces so often that every time a new person comes in, they have this bright idea that they're going to revolutionize how Pakistan thinks about climate, and it doesn't really get anywhere. And what I felt most importantly was isolation on the global front, because we really had on our left and right no one to talk to. If we wanted to make an agenda item, we would run to China, but they would have 44 other countries they're listening to, or Saudi Arabia, but they had the Arab bloc they were listening to, and then the Indians were, not in our soft corner. The Americans had another agenda with the Biden and Trump administration, having different agendas on their own. So I felt a lot of global isolation, and I think Pakistan really needs to work on this from a Foreign Office perspective and a climate change perspective, both.
I think that's a key recommendation that we need to. But like when you say about government, I'm sure it's just not on the international front, because for us, people who live in the country, who see the government's responses to the needs of the people, our first question always is that we might be getting less money, but we keep on hearing about, big commitments like IMF giving this much money, FCDO giving this much money. Now World Bank with the country partnership framework says that they will also have a $20 billion program. Now, how do citizens know that this money is being spent on certain, benefits in terms of mitigation and adaptation? Where do we look up to? What are the issues in governance that we really need to resolve on the local front as well?
I think the one thing that, at CarbonTrack we're looking for is this centralized repository of all the climate financing that has been going on in the country, the private sector capital and the public sector capital. You can ask anyone in government right now, they will not be able to tell you a single figure. You go to the provincial governments, they'll all tell you different figures, because actually there's a Ministry of Climate Change, and then there's the Ministry of Environment in Punjab, Ministry of Forestry in Sindh. They don't talk to each other, so their numbers don't match. So actually, even on the government side, as a federation, we don't have a number. On the private side, when you talk about the World Bank and the IMFs and whatnot's coming in, they're actually, a lot of their capital is going to private sector entities. So for example, one of the great projects that I think is coming up right now is green fuel for airplanes that is coming out of Lahore, right? So those projects, such as those, are actually going direct to private capital, and they will never report them because they're not public sector companies. So actually, it's very, very complicated to consolidate this data. And I think that's where companies like CarbonTrack come in, where they have private sector partners and public sector partners, and we try to put that in the same realm of everything.
And also, when we talk about the private sector, I think much like the public sector in Pakistan, the private sector has been slow to capitalize on green financing, and we have the example of just one green bond in Pakistan. And if you look at, for example, China's Exim Bank lists maybe 7 bonds per year internationally, and they've been doing this for the past 10-15 years. What is the private sector's issue here? Like, we know that, okay, the financing volumes coming into Pakistan have been very varying, again, because of political risks. At the same time, there's, I think, a lack of transparency on what are the private sector's contributions to mitigation. How do we actually, work around it?
So on this exact agenda item, we did some work with Transparency International, and we looked at, the governance structure and the transparency and the reporting of both the private sector and the public sector. And we saw a problem within the human capital. They don't really understand the needs and what they need to deliver. And the other side is that there's actually just no real data available that you can actually churn out as well. So what we've been trying to do with entities like Transparency International is chalk out this governance structure whereby the whole data can then flow, and then that data flows into the larger piece of work we're talking about, the climate finance tracker. So at CarbonTrack, what we're trying to do is consolidate the entities and then make them report, but also report in the right way, because you have to report according to the standards that are being applied globally, not what someone in the Ministry of Climate Change thinks of today. So that's kind of where we're at. I think Pakistan is not in the best space, and I think we're slightly behind our regional partners, because globally climate finance has become a hot topic where the private sector is really pouncing on it. And I think as institutions within the private sector as well, our banks, I feel that some of them are dinosaurs because they've become so used to lending to the government that they feel no need to innovate, right? Whilst you have the fintechs who are innovating, but they're too small and they don't have enough capital in their pockets. So I think there has to be some middle ground where some smaller fintechs and some larger banks, with the push of the state bank, really kind of go full steam into green financing.
Regarding green financing, I think one thing that I see missing in the picture is that financing only usually follows if there is a project to fund, which is green. And in our case, a lot of the industry has been very slow to get onto the ESG bandwagon, to the point that we have very few sustainability reports, and maybe the coming mandate will increase the volume of sustainability. how do we, really make sure that our companies are able to match the pace which India or Bangladesh has done, and really take up the volume of ESG reporting as well?
Okay, so there's a couple of moving parts here, right? The first thing is, do you have the data to make a report? So I think 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10 people will say no. For the people, the 0.5 who say yes are actually possibly exporters, not all the exporters who have some software linked with Hugo Boss or Adidas or something, who've mandated that a decade ago. Some leaders like Interloop or Style Textile who have that because of their customer, not because of their own push. Today, you need to change that because there's new regulations such as CBAM, which is the cross-border adjustment mechanism, which is not going to allow you to send Pakistani product to the US or other such regions without that green passport. So that green financing element will automatically come in because you'll have a project that will create the green passport. But what will be missing in this entire puzzle will be this tool or this ability or this HR to actually make that report, get that report certified. So, your client X in San Francisco says, okay, I'm willing to take your product because your supply chain is fully green enabled and integrated. And that's kind of what we're looking at this point in time. We've made this tool called CarbonTrack. It's fully AI enabled. And what we're doing is with, the global standards, we've come up with emission factors, which are also, globally acclaimed. And we're going to help organizations, private and public, churn their data, tell them how to improve their data, and give them a way forward for the next 5 to 10, 15 years, and also help them report so they can actually, deliver those results to their clients.
No, I think that's a great, really combination of tools that you're working with, and very happy to hear about these initiatives.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we will also conclude. Thank you, Mekaeel, for joining us and explaining the whole I think dynamic from the top at the government level to the private sector level. And we hope that recommendations like these are also informing the government. And with the Breathe Pakistan initiative, we really want the government to take more advocacy and awareness and take it forward in a way that Pakistan's mitigation adaptation efforts can be recognized internationally. And with that, we'd like to conclude and see you soon.